In May of 2020, the horrifying video of then Minneapolis Police Officer Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck rocketed around the world, inciting anger and outrage. KMOJ Radio, Ampers, and the Minnesota Humanities Center teamed up to create Racial Reckoning, the Arc of Justice, a journalism initiative that consisted of daily 2-minute updates and a weekly podcast. The goal of the project, to cover the trials of the former officers who killed George Floyd through a Black, Indigenous, people of color lens, with the long-term goal of changing racial narratives in local news.
This idea of a racial reckoning project, I decided that we needed to try to figure out a way to report on news of importance to our communities. We've been through Jamar Clark, we've been through Philando Castile, we've been through teacher negotiations, the police, but we don't have it from the first person perspective that only our listeners and reporters who look like me can share. Watching, as a lot of Americans did, the upheaval, the uprising at the nation's capital. And I can remember seeing the different reporters who were covering the story, and it was just frustrating because I did not see one person of color telling the story through their voice and hearing it from their perspective. Even though the facts are the facts, there is a difference, I thought, in sharing. And then we got telephone calls from our listening audience asking who was our reporter on the scene. Well, not only did we not have a reporter on the scene, we have no news department.
What was it like to have young women of color make up the team and having them report on undertold stories out on the field?
In a word, refreshing. It was great hearing Safiya Mohamed. It was great hearing Feven Gerezgiher and the entire team talking and being bold and having the courage. So when I see and I hear your voices on the air, it's refreshing, it's heartwarming. I was glad that we were able to give a platform to our young journalists to cover stories that really mean a lot to the people who listen. So let me turn the table, Safiya. You were directly involved in the process. You were part of Racial Reckoning. I heard your voice almost daily. I bet it gave you the confidence that you can do this.
Mm-hmm. It was very eye-opening in the sense that I learned so much from the women on the team and from the mentors. This project has given me hope that things like this that are centered on social justice, equity, they're doable, and that people are listening and that the need is there and it's being fulfilled.
It's such an honor to have worked alongside you and all the other amazing women who helped report on the Racial Reckoning Project. And to know that, the credibility, the reputation that I have developed, the relationships that I've cultivated in community now can be tapped into by other women who want to do this work. Because at the end of the day, I'm only one person.
Right.
I can only be at one place at a time. And so we need other perspectives. We need other journalists who are out here wanting to tell these stories, wanting to change the narrative. And I think even for me, there's times where this work can be really challenging. And so I'm curious to know from you as a Black woman, what was it like, having to report on some of these stories, having to, run the website or run social media during a time when a lot of the stories we're covering were very traumatic?
Yeah. The parts that were hard on the website were definitely comments. We would boost a story and we would just get all these really angry comments from people. But you're not allowed to comment back, right? You have to, retain your composure because, you are the face of Racial Reckoning, so you can't comment back. The most you can do is maybe block them or just let other people hopefully fight your battles for you. So that was really hard. Watching people just say these things and you're on the project. So these things aren't true. You're a Black woman, so these things aren't true. But you just kind of have to hope that somebody else will fight for you. And then we would always talk about it in our meetings, and that was always helpful as well, just to debrief. But it's hard, when somebody who looks like you is, the victim in the situation, and you're just like watching the public have opinions about it. But to you, there's no opinions. There's it feels like fact to you.
And nobody's calling them a victim.
Exactly. Yeah. That too.
What was interesting for me coming into this situation was, first off, that we were given permission to try something new. And I was specifically told, think about why you do things the way you do, and if there is a reason for that, or if you want to try doing it a different way. We have permission to do that. And what I loved was how people bought into that and took advantage of it. Like one of our reporters said, I don't want to ever use the phrase officer-involved shooting in any of my stories. And we're like, okay, that's not a phrase we're going to use. We're going to be more specific. We're going to make sure that this is, that we say exactly what happened. And that when each of you came forward with a story, it was like my role was to say yes, and that to trust your judgment as a Black woman who, in your lived experience, you have so much more knowledge that I will never have because of that. And so to trust when you say, I think this is an important story, we should do this story. And my default is to say, yes, absolutely. How can I help you tell that story? Which is a different climate than the newsrooms I think that George and I have worked in are used to having. So for me, it was really satisfying to be able to participate in creating that culture and just saying, we're here to make something new possible. So how do we do it? And why not? Rather than saying why, it was why not?
Well, I appreciate the trust that you and Georgia and Amber's just put in a lot of us young journalists. A lot of the very large news stations or radio stations within the Twin Cities didn't want anybody with no experience. I know, what can I say? I know how to tell stories, give me a chance, and no one was doing that. And so it was really great for this project to be like, you're young and that's an asset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and some of the news stations didn't want people who had experience either.
They didn't know what they wanted.
And so I think for me, this project symbolized the opportunity that so many women and people of color deserve, journalists of color deserve, to be able to be in community and tell our stories, ultimately. I think that there is a cultural competence that we as people of color, Black women, hold that, give us a different lens and perspective, a different empathy, a different compassion when we're going into our community and we're amplifying voices to know who to talk to, and when to talk to them, and how to talk to them about difficult subjects in a way that strengthens relationships as opposed to, creating more distance and barriers or distrust between community and the media.
I think for me, the lesson I kept on learning and relearning was that it just takes the opportunity to do the work and to do the work repeatedly to get better. Sure, I might have made some suggestions about how you voice your story or, which voices you might want to go to. But really, it's just giving people the opportunity to do the work again and again will make them better reporters. So how do we make sure that everybody has access to those opportunities? And that's what was lovely about this project, was taking a group of amazing young women and saying, we're going to give you opportunities to cover a really big national story. And your perspective on that story and your take and your voice is so important and should be right out there with all the other national newsrooms. And then to be able to have our reporters in the courtroom. And the difference in how community viewed our reporters versus the national reporters who are coming in and sticking microphones in their faces. It's oh, we know these people. And we have a relationship with these people because they came to George Floyd Square several times during this whole process, as opposed to somebody who just shows up for the big day?
For me, I think, regardless of how long you've been doing this work, we can always learn, we can always grow.
Absolutely.
And even I think there were times where you and I had some very tense conversations about narrative, because that's something I feel so strongly about. And like us both together having to unlearn some of the traditional techniques or approaches to storytelling.
Yeah. And that was that front end where we were first figuring out how each other worked, and where I was like, well, no, this is the way we do it. And then having to sit back and be like, wait, this is one of those moments. Why do we do it the way we do it? Is there a reason why we can't do it a different way? People found different ways of telling stories or different angles on stories that I was like, this would never have been pitched in the newsrooms that I've worked in. I mean, this is, there were story ideas that came through that I thought, that's a beautiful story idea. And it's not the head-on approach that a typical newsroom would take. And they missed it. Georgia, what did you get out of this project in terms of like working with this team of young women? I mean, I know for me, oftentimes it's like when I work with younger reporters is when I'm like reminded of why I'm in the business kind of thing. It's just like reinvigorating. I mean, what was the experience like for you?
It was just really gratifying to see their growth, to be able to share things that I've learned along the way. It was really inspiring to also be somewhat of an example that as a woman of color in a male-dominated, white-dominated industry, that you can do this work and you can do it on your own terms in a way that aligns with your values. I'm so proud of everybody in the project who has found their voice. I think like just seeing you start out and telling your first story and hearing how you try different things with your voice and getting comfortable. There was a safe space for everyone to grow, including myself. It was powerful to have that community. As an independent journalist, I didn't have that. I didn't have a space where I can impart in others and help them in their journey, but then also a space where I can come to plant myself and further grow as well. The sustainability also is real. Like, to have an ecosystem that we can plug into, I think for me was also very meaningful as a mother of 3. I planned to cover the trial regardless. And so when I got the phone call about the project, I was like, oh, great, you're going to pay me to do what I was already going to do. Like, this is fantastic. To be back on KMOJ was full circle for me because that's where I started. So there was just so much. It warmed my heart. It filled me to work with you all and to see the industry changing.
Yeah.
And
to know that you're a part of that like, I mean, talking about Chioma's voice developing and remember your last story, you're like, that was my most Georgia take yet. And that you brought with you opportunities for Chioma and Samantha and Feven to get in front of a video camera for coverage.
I pushed them a little bit.
Yes, you did.
Like, just try it. It's very similar.
Why not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, we're here to... What did I say we're going to do?
Oh, okay.
Got it.
All right, let's do it.
I'm Samantha HoangLong with the Racial Reckoning Project. We're here at Phelps Park in Minneapolis.
Today, people have gathered for an event reflecting and honoring the life of George Floyd.
They include an exhibition of art created in response to his death.
Next, let's hear from some organizers and artists who put together this event.
This is really a statement that everybody can kind of get behind.
We're 1 year out from the murder of George Floyd. How are you all feeling as we approach that anniversary?
I'm kind of saddened because I don't feel like there has been a lot of change for this to be a whole year to have passed.
How have you been processing all of your feelings and thoughts about the year?
Sometimes I've been dreaming about George Floyd, and Sometimes I pray for him.
So would you say that the project, Racial Reckoning, met your expectations, exceeded it?
Exceeded. Yeah. I would say just like during my college experience, I was in like multiple newsrooms just as an intern, and like I've been able to sit in on different editorial meetings, and just the way that we handled it at Racial Reckoning, sitting in those meetings was just a whole nother like vibe, a whole nother experience, because like you're just able to be vulnerable, you're able to express like how covering this specific news is impacting you, and that's just like unheard of in most newsrooms, I would say. Like
yeah, I think we were all equals, even though, you know, Marianne was our editor, but even though you had so much more experience than us, treated our ideas seriously. And I loved being with other young women of color who had like just entered the journalism industry, and it was really fun because we all felt like friends, and it was just amazing every single time that like Feven or Chioma like opened their mouths, basically. I was like, whoa. And I learned so much from people I'm really lucky to consider friends.
Yeah, I felt like it was very radical. I mean, this was my first like journalism position. And then like to be in a space where I'm like very supported. We're going into police trials, they're very intense. There's a lot of protests, like take care of yourself. And if you're going into a protest, like take somebody with you. And I don't know that that's always the message I've heard about like entry-level jobs. It's like you should be burning yourself out, and you should do whatever it takes to get the story. And even if that means kind of trampling on people's privacy and what they might feel comfortable doing at that moment.
Yeah, all of my experience with mainstream reporting outlets and doing internships with them, they seem to very much just like release you into the world without much help. Like, go cover this protest by yourself. And when Marianne suggested like that I could have someone with me, it was like, wow, like I can have this, like I can ask for help. And so one of the first assignments I did in the field was interviewing people after the city said they were going to reopen George Floyd Square. And people were very, clearly sensitive. They were very wary of press. They probably felt burnt out from all of the press that had converged onto George Floyd Square, but now also fearing that the space they had built would be interrupted. And so people were really sensitive of being there with Chioma, the both of us, being very clear that we were there to listen and get the story right. People trusted us.
On Thursday morning, neighbors near George Floyd Square awoke to find that city workers had removed the concrete barriers that blocked off 38th and Chicago. Julia Johnson says though the concrete barriers provided a sense of security for the square, she believes the community will be able to fill that gap.
I have faith in my community, and that if another drop of blood is spilled, if one more person from our community is stolen from us, that we will erect another George Floyd Square.
For the Racial Reckoning Project, I'm Tiffany Bui.
One of the things that we talked about with Chioma was like how this space really helped her find her voice. Would you describe that as your experience in the program too?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, it's like interesting being in the space of like you need to be objective and you need to tell the story as like facts-based, but also there are ways to put in your voice. And so that's something that we had like space to play with. Or that was like something we got to discuss at our weekly meetings was like, here's something that came up in a story. We had to change the language. How do we feel about that as a project? And how are we shifting our focus? Or like, how does that tie into the stories that we want to tell? So that was cool. Like, I think that we had a lot of like reflection built into it in terms of like, what do we want journalism to look like, and what does reporting on our communities accurately and fairly look like? I don't know if you felt that way.
Well, I feel like for me, I came into the project already as an independent journalist where I had spent a lot of time creating space to redefine what journalism meant to me and to challenge the status quo that I experienced when I worked in mainstream media. And so even within this project, I feel like in setting the foundation of what does a safe environment look like for women of color, journalists of color to come to be authentic, right? But to also still uphold the values of journalism. You still want to be balanced. You want to be unbiased, you want to be accurate, but we want to be authentic to ourselves. I think my concern was with you all coming in with not as much experience as I had. Like, are these women going to feel comfortable advocating for themselves? And so I felt tremendous responsibility to have some of those tough conversations early on about what does it mean to create space for women of color to do this work authentically.
I feel really grateful that like we got to work with you, Georgia, because I just remember like I think one of the first days you were in the courtroom, you were talking about like you're in your report, you were talking about how you were one of the only Black people in the room. And like I think a lot of reporters generally overlook like the nuances behind being the only person of color in the room. You know, watching your professional report like online, sitting out there, including that nuance to detail was just like, okay, like that's okay to do that, like to bring these little details that are often overlooked into the story. And it's not making the story about you. It's capturing the reality of what it felt like in that news or in that courtroom.
I was one of just 2 journalists inside the courtroom when Judge Cahill sentenced Derek Chauvin to 22 and a half years in prison. So despite the fact that 22 and a half years is the longest sentence any officers received in the state of Minnesota, the Floyd family says it's not enough.
As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months.
Chauvin's sentencing marks the end of a chapter in America.
I can imagine working in a newsroom with other people of color and other women, and that's like a real thing that can happen. I had always sort of wondered what that would be like, having worked in predominantly white newsrooms and having to feel like I had to constantly be on my toes or advocate for myself, whereas here I had people who were willing to look out for me and also advocate for me and validate my ideas. And so I feel like because I was here at Racial Reckoning, I could move into a newsroom like this. Like I could imagine a newsroom like this. I don't know if I could necessarily build one, but I know that that is a space that I want to be in. So,
well, I think that's the perfect segue to the next question. What was your reaction? What was your reaction to working alongside other women of color?
Yes.
Yeah. Dream team.
Dream team.
I never felt like it was super competitive or whatever. Like I could always ask people for help.
Yeah, I went out with Safiya on her first assignment, and she was covering the reaction, I believe, to Chauvin's sentencing. And it was her first in the field reporting, and so she was really nervous, but she did like an amazing job. It was so cool to see the way that she navigated, how she spoke to people and made them feel comfortable. Even when she told me afterwards, like, I felt so nervous, it was just amazing to see her and to be able to support her in some small way. And people were really comfortable being around us, I think, because we are women of color. I think specifically people were really happy to see Safiya, who is Black and Muslim, and they felt really comfortable around her. And she just put everyone at ease, with both her personality and her identity being a part of that. And it just felt really good because we would both ask questions to the person, to the source, but not in an overwhelming way. It felt like all 3 of us had a rapport and we had a natural conversation instead of just being, me in my reporter hat, having to be super professional and detached from this person who is telling me something very personal, very emotional, very sensitive. So it's a really amazing experience.
On Friday, Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years of prison. He is the first white Minneapolis police officer to be convicted of murdering a Black person. Members of George Floyd's family shared their reactions. Floyd's nephew, Brandon Williams, said he is not celebrating the sentence. Local community members like Alula Doga echoed the family's sentiments.
I'm pissed, to say the least. I thought they were at least going to give him 30 and then get him out on good behavior, but I feel like he's going to get out 15 years in, at most, probably less.
For the Racial Reckoning Project, I'm Safiya Mohamed.
One thing I loved about like our team is like you don't really have to explain like the basis of who you are. It's just there. I don't know. We just get each other. When we were in the field, we would just like approach people so casually, and I think like a lot of times like people think of reporters as like vultures or whatever, but our the way we approached like storytelling was just so community oriented, and I loved that. Like,
generally, were there times where you felt like our project or us as women of color were able to capture the essence of a story in a way that better reflected what the community was really experiencing?
I was able to do a story about what it meant to see Kim Potter crying on stand. And I think I was able to do those critical stories that may not have made sense to an editor if I pitched it somewhere else. Like, why do we want to talk about her crying? I think a lot of news outlets covered her tears as maybe a show of contrition, as a video / soundbite that shows her being really emotional and that gets views. But Marianne empowered me to think more critically about this story and then do a feature specifically talking about like what is the history of white women weaponizing their tears or their victimhood, especially against Black men, and what it means to what those tears mean to like white men and how they enact violence against Black men. And so going into that history, I think was really important. Whether or not Kim Potter was faking it or whatever doesn't matter, is that there is history behind there. And I felt like I could explore that. And I was really grateful for that experience.
With some of the verdicts coming out, or like holidays like Juneteenth, not feeling as obligated to do like, here are the facts and here's how many people came out, but like, I'm just going to talk to some random people and get some different sounds, just to kind of do like a little audio painting of like, here's what the Twin Cities sounds like today, and here are what some people are thinking. And they don't have to be like prominent activists to have their voice put on. And then that was also another thing I think we were kind of mindful of, is like varying who our quotes are from. Gay Adams Massey is CEO of YWCA St. Paul.
This has been such a year for all of us, with COVID, with a real focus on racial injustice in our communities, and looking for opportunities to celebrate something as important as Juneteenth with our entire community. We thought was a fun and special thing to do.
The celebration featured local talents showcasing upcoming stars such as the Walker West Youth Jazz Ensemble. For the Racial Reckoning Project, I'm Feven Gerezgiher.
Well, I'm so proud of each one of you. It has just been, it's hard to articulate like how inspiring it's been to watch all of you grow and find your voice and find your way and find opportunities and continue doing this work. And it's been an honor to be somewhat of an inspiration to you guys. Like, it's so flattering to know that in a small way I have impacted your journey, and I know that Marianne feels the same way. I'm excited to see where you're going to be in a year from now, and 3 years from now, and 5 years from now. And I do know that this experience was really, really special because in my 12, 13 years in media, I've never been a part of something that was this amazing and collaborative and innovative and challenging status quo and changing narratives and all of the radical things that we did. And so I think that if each one of us take something from this project and we cherish it and we bring it in the work that we're doing today, I know that our communities and our reporting and our newsrooms that we're a part of are going to be much better because of it. So I have deep gratitude for each one of you, and I'm always here for you.